you'll find this information helpful, and feel free to follow up with me at any time to learn a little bit more about what the fishbone diagram is all about. So here's what I want to go through. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the fishbone diagram. I'll go over those lessons on revitalization that I believe the fishbone diagram helps us with. And then I'll talk to you about some training that we provide in the society. And that training, by the way, is helpful for pastors, denominational leaders, and those aspiring to become consultants. So we'll take a look at that. But first, I want to give you the background on where this thing came from and how I approached it. It is now a 58-page paper. I just added 11 pages in this update. And my intent all along was just to find a comprehensive tool. I had always been a student of church health, and frequently was asked by others that I had association with in the society to critique different kinds of health assessment. Did I like this one, or did I think this one was better than that one? And so that prompted me to kind of elevate my own learning in this area. And I did this literature review, as you can see. I took a very disciplined approach, as you can see in the pyramid here, that I looked at it theologically. I looked at what Christian leaders were saying. I looked at survey tools that others were providing, and even some secular books. So, for example, books on leading change and organizational design, some of those things. And then finally, I kind of, you can't help but plow into it your own experience, your education, ministry experience. I had some corporate management experience and consulting experience. And so all of those things played a part in me writing the white paper. And I'm taking you right now to this right-hand column. And again, this is just a partial listing of some of the books that I took a look at, but I think you can see right away the commonality that I'm going for here is that many of the things in the literature about approaching church health assessment will prompt us to think about a certain number of components of health that we should pay attention to. So it may be Rick Warren's 5 purposes. We have Stephen Mackey's 10 traits, all the way up to 12 keys from Ken and Callahan. And this is how I landed on what you're going to see in the white paper, that the fishbone diagram advocates for us to take a look at 12 components of health. And that can be a tool for assessing the health of a church and for helping a church turn around and rebounding toward health and better health and growth. The concept of a fishbone may be new to you. It comes out of manufacturing, and I probably was first aware of it when I got my MBA and I was working in a corporate setting. And as you can see from manufacturing world, what they were looking for was if there were, for example, manufacturing flaws that were happening, which would be the effect. They wanted to have a systematic way of looking at different categories that would be contributing to that effect. Well, I took that same diagram concept and I said, well, what if the effect is church health and church growth? And what would the categories be? And my conclusion that I rationalized in the white paper is that the top part of the fishbone diagram should be what's in the Lawless Church Health Survey that Tom Rainer and Lawless developed back in the 90s. And these are timeless principles of health that come out of Acts 2. But then I had to land as well, based on the literature review, my own experience, I had to land on what I call the bottom bones of the fishbone diagram, which are much more organizational. And along with that, I developed a survey that helps assess those areas. So here's how the fishbone diagram came out. These are the 6 components of health that are in the Lawless survey. Again, they're timeless. These are things that we should see in all churches at all times. The driving part of the whole fishbone is, how can we be healthy? I take my cue from the Great Commission in Matthew 28. And to me, it is about reaching more and maturing more. And so there's an element of church growth that is embedded in my definition of church health. And I think the definition that we see in the Great Commission and the book of Acts and the rest of the New Testament for that matter. But supporting these more organic aspects of church health are these more organizational things that will help lead to a healthier organic life. All of my definitions are in the white paper, and I'm going to show you how to get a hold of that. And I show you a cross-reference so you can tie every one of these into the many assessments and literature review that I did. Let me show you how this tool can be used. Again, I use this in consulting, and this is from a live consultation that I did with a church. And you can see what I'm doing here, that with the 12 components of health, I'm using kind of a traffic light analogy to where if an area is healthy, I'm giving it a green shading. If it's marginally healthy, it's yellow. And if it's not very healthy at all, I'm giving it a red shading. Notice in this church that all of the Acts 2 timeless components of health came out marginally healthy, although evangelism and discipleship were the lowest areas of health. But down in the organizational area, resources actually came out really well. In fact, across the board, they were doing great in facilities, finance, information technology, etc. But onboarding got a red light. What do I mean by onboarding? I mean assimilation and paying attention to the back door. I think this is a contextual, cultural area where churches that are plateaued or declining need a lot of help, and that's why it landed on my list. Then the other place that they're not doing well in is they were aging in place, older than their community. Their strategic vocabulary was kind of weak, and so I gave them a red light there. Let me show you what happens in the way you can turn this around, though, literally turn it around and use it as a revitalization tool. If I go to my next slide, this is how I made a recommendation for improved health for this church. And that is that prayer, which came out the highest, I said, well, let's use your prayer strength, and then let's do a better job of disciple making, because that can affect everything on the top here and many things that go on in the bottom. And then I had other recommendations here. So go back here, it's looking a little grim, way too much yellow and some red, but there is a path, a revitalization path that can be taken. Okay, so what's changed? I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. There's 11 more pages of content than the last time around. I'm giving more definitions. You can see those words, a little more clarity on why I landed on 12 components. I do those cross references so you can see how my 12 components tie into what Barna has said, what Lawless, Rayner, etc. have all said. I give you a little bit more clarity on how to get the survey tools, because there's the Lawless survey tool you can use for the top bones, and I developed a survey tool for the organizational bones. And then I included in the white paper this 7 lessons on revitalization that I'm going to share with you. So let's go to that. And the first thing I want to say, just by way of introduction, please hear that I'm not saying that the diagram, using a fishbone, that's inspired at all. It's not. It's just a tool. It's an illustration. What I am saying is that the biblical and cultural and contextual matters that support every one of the 12 components being an important component of health. All of those things are worth paying attention to, and they tell us how we can help a church become revitalized. I'll finish up on that society training as the last topic, but let's go through those 7 lessons on revitalization. And the first one is this, that growth is not optional when we're considering church health. And this is my rationale for saying, again, the head is what we're talking about is church health. And my definition of church health is that healthy things grow, that growth is embedded in the Great Commission. And I'm using the life cycle curve here as an illustration because every church can follow this curve. This is from Dale's book, To Dream Again. But every church, when it's planted, it starts out with a dream of reaching more people for Christ, a dream of growing, reaching more and then maturing them. But at some point, things get plateaued and then they fall off, and the need for revitalization occurs. So, partly what I'm saying here is on some because so many churches are plateaued and declining, there's been a little bit of a rationalization that, well, maybe growth isn't God's will for our church. And I have a hard time seeing that biblically, and I would encourage you to consider that as well. The second lesson that I see comes from the spine, and that is that all of the areas of health and growth are interconnected. And what I mean by that is that all 12 components can either contribute to the overall health and growth of a church, or they can contribute to a lack of health and a lack of growth. Each component can influence the other components, some more than others. But what I would say to you is that this should not be surprising to us at all, because it's in our Bibles that as it is, there are many parts, but there's one body. Every one of them is connected. And we can't understate that at all as we're trying to approach an assessment of health as well as trying to figure out a path toward revitalization. The third lesson that I see is that the top bones tell us that the church is primarily organic and relational. That's what we get from the teaching in Acts 2, the picture that God gave us through the book of Acts 2, the chapter of Acts 2, which is a description of what was going on in the New Testament church, but then it's prescriptively taught throughout the rest of the New Testament that these horizontal and vertical relational dimensions of health are components of health that we should see in every church at any time. And this is where the organic life of